Hey players, trigger warning. This is some very disturbing content. So we talked about what happened to Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Parker back in January on my podcast, The Real T with Double D. But last week there was a major development. The 6 deputies involved in beating and essaying Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Parker earlier this year pled guilty to several federal charges. The officers are Christian Diedmon, Hunter Elward, Brett McAlpin, Jeffrey Middleton, and Daniel Opendike of the Rankin County Sheriff's Department in Mississippi, and Joshua Hartfield, a Richland police officer. They pled guilty to charges including conspiracy against rights, obstruction of justice, deprivation of rights under the color of law, discharge of a firearm under a crime of violence, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. They may likely spend the rest of their lives in prison, and that's where they should be. Let's get into the details. So according to the federal charging document, on the evening of January 24th, Christian Diedmon texted his fellow officers, Hunter Elroy, Jeffrey Middleton, and Daniel Opendike, that they were going to a property in Braxton to handle a complaint that was given to him by the chief investigator, Brett McAlpin. Apparently, McAlpin's white neighbor had told him that several black men were staying at a white woman's home there and reported seeing suspicious behavior. In the text messages, Christian Diedmon warned the deputies that there may be surveillance cameras on the property, and if they spot any cameras, to just knock on the door instead of kicking it down. But if they don't see anything, they should just go ahead and barge in without a warrant. He also said no bad mugshots, and the other deputies understood what he meant. They had the green light to use excessive force on areas of the person's body that would not be captured in a mugshot. That's what the prosecutor said in their federal charging documents. Christian Diedmon also told the other officers over the radio that off-duty Richland police officer Joshua Hartfield would also accompany them. So they rode to the house in 4 separate cars, and when they got there, McAlpin was already in the neighborhood watching the property from down the street, and he followed behind. Now, there was a surveillance camera over the front door of the home, so the officers decided to go in through the carport door. They then kicked it down and entered the home without a warrant. The officers then encountered 2 black men, Eddie Parker and Michael Jenkins. Eddie Parker was living there to help take care of the woman who owned the property, and Michael Jenkins was his friend, and he was temporarily staying there. And according to the federal charging documents, over the next 2 hours were complete torture for Eddie Parker and Michael Jenkins. They were subjected to grueling violence at the hands of these 6 white police officers, and also Michael Jenkins was shot in the mouth. When the officers forced their way into the home, Christian Diedmon demanded that Eddie Parker tell him where the drugs were stashed in the home. Parker said there were no drugs in the home. Christian Diedmon pulled out a weapon and fired a bullet into a wall of the adjoining laundry room before ordering Parker a second time to reveal where the drugs were at. Parker once again insisted that there were no drugs. The officers then hauled the 6 men into the living room, where all 6 officers spewed racial slurs at them and accused them of taking advantage of the white woman who owned the house. They also warned them to stay out of Rankin County and go back to their side of the Pearl River. They were referring to neighborhoods with a higher population of black residents. Christian Diedmon, he was brutal. He would tase Corey Jenkins over and over again. He actually placed it directly on his body and tased him. Meanwhile, Officer Opendike searched the house and kicked open the bedroom door, where he found a actual toy and a BB gun. According to the charging document, Opendike mounted the actual toy on the end of the weapon and brought it into the living room. Christian Diedmon then took the toy and slapped Corey Jenkins and Eddie Parker in the face with it. He threatened to take advantage of the men with the device, but stopped when he realized that Corey Jenkins had defecated on himself. They then held the men to the floor, poured milk, alcohol, and chocolate syrup into their mouths, and poured cooking grease on Eddie Parker's head. and they also threw eggs at both men. After that, the officers forced the men to take off their clothes and shower together to wash away the evidence, and the abuse continued after the shower. They then assaulted Eddie Parker with pieces of wood and a metal sword. And then after this, they forced Corey Jenkins to his knees, put a weapon in his mouth, and fired. That bullet lacerated his tongue, broke his jaw, and went out through his neck. And they did not call for help after this. Corey Jenkins was actually laying on the floor bleeding out as the officers convened on the back porch to devise a cover story. The officers told investigators that Christian Diedmund found drugs on Corey Jenkins outside the house, and the officers ran inside after Corey Jenkins. They also said that Elroy shot him in self-defense, and Elroy was the only one inside of the house at the time. The officers began to destroy evidence. They also were thinking about planting a weapon on Corey Jenkins, but they ended up using the BB gun they had earlier with the actual toy. And they were doing all of this planning while Corey Jenkins was still bleeding and not receiving medical attention. They discarded one shell casing, and they threw the men's soiled clothes into a wooded area and then stole the hard drive from the home surveillance system before throwing it into a creek. Each officer filed false police reports to corroborate their cover story and continued to abide by the false script in interviews with the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. And this case did not move until in mid-June, Eddie Parker and Corey Jenkins filed a $400 million federal civil rights lawsuit alleging that the officers had turned off their body cameras and handcuffed, kicked, waterboarded, punched, and repeatedly used tasers on the two men. Corey Jenkins suffered permanent physical injuries and cognitive damage, including disfigurement and impairment. Now, again, they did plead guilty to the federal charges, but they're also charged by the state with conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, also home invasion, and aggravated assault. Now, the Rankin County Sheriff Bailey has apologized to the men for what happened. He said that he's ashamed and that the badge of law enforcement was tarnished by the criminal acts of a few individuals. But Corey Jenkins and Eddie Parker said that they tried repeatedly to tell their story, but they weren't believed. I hope that these cowards spend the rest of their lives in prison. I hope that Sheriff Bailey loses his job in whatever way, shape, form, or fashion that may look like. And I also hope that the Rankin County and the state of Mississippi pay these two men the $400 million plus that they owe them for what they went through. This is ridiculous and a hot boo shitty mess. But it's Mississippi. I'm really surprised to see accountability come so fast. It happened in January and they pled guilty in August. I'm actually surprised to see that. But players, I want to know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments. This is Double Demo for the Black Accurate News.